Welcome to Bottle Rocket with Elena Sucheva, your top hockey podcast.
Welcome back to Bottle Rocket, the Thinking Fans Puck podcast. I'm Elena, joined as always by Maeve, Teabag, and today we have our guest, the man who's written Islanders history, rock history, and half the New York sports shelf, absolute legend, Greg Prato. Welcome, Greg.
Well, thank you very much. I definitely appreciate that you just called me a quote-unquote legend.
You are a
Thank you.
legend. You are the only guy who has done two terrific oral histories of the Islanders. So
Stan,
you are automatically iconic. And as an author, and our friend T-Bag, I'm sure will agree, because if he doesn't, we'll hit him on the head with a big mallet. That to do such a thing, author two great books like this back to back, your first two hockey books is admirable. Because as I read it, I was just knocked over with the. Okay, so my first question is, what made you do? What inspired you to do the Dynasty book, which was your first one, correct?
yes, that was my first one. This is what the cover looks like of that one.
Right.
A nice picture of vintage Nassau Coliseum.
Yes, and I got to add lib to that. When Clarence Campbell was the president of the league and they finished the Coliseum, they invited him to take a look before the opening game. And he looked around and he said, "This is going to be the best rink in the NHL," which it was.
Yep.
So tell us what about Dynasty, what made you do it and how tough?
Sure. Well, I've been a lifetime fan of the Islanders. In fact, I was lucky. The first game I ever saw was the TV broadcast live of Game 6 of the 1980 Stanley Cup. So that is like the best first game. Then the second game is probably the second game I saw on TV was probably the second best game you could see, which was the Islanders' improbable comeback against the Penguins in the 1982 playoffs. So from that point on, I was hooked. I was a major Islanders fan. I would watch all the games. I would, something I talk about in this book that my favorite to this day, my favorite sportscaster teams were definitely the Islanders during the 80s with Jiggs McDonald, Eddie Westfall, and then you, Stan, doing the between period commentary. That to me, like I would actually sit there and watch the between period things because it was so good. You would be speaking to players and things like that. So that's what I really enjoyed. But through that, I just stayed. I stuck with the Islanders through the years. In the late 90s, I became a writer. And then about, I forget when, but it would have been like 2005, 6, 7, 8, around then, I came up with the idea of maybe doing a book about the Islanders. And I shopped around to publishers. And at the time, not one single publisher would say yes to it because I guess the Islanders just weren't taken seriously or they didn't think that it would sell. So I just took it upon myself to do the first book, Dynasty, and I wound up putting it out myself. And to this day, it's my best-selling sports book because I've done also books about the Jets, Mets, Yankees, and two with the Islanders. Yeah, so like you said with that book, Dynasty, it's in oral history form, which means that there will be a topic like the 1980 Stanley Cup Finals, and then it's all quotes from people I spoke to for this book. They were all exclusive interviews. Like for this book, I interviewed you, Stan, for instance. I interviewed, sadly, a lot of people that aren't that are no longer with us, such as Jean Potvin, Clark Gillies, Al Arbor. So and then plus I also interviewed Bob Nystrom, Brian Trottier, Chico Resch, other people. So yes, that's how I wound up doing this book. And again, still to this day, it still sells well, and I still get emails from people saying how much they enjoyed it. And it was great, Stan, to get a message from you a few years back saying that you also enjoyed it, and that's how we hooked up through email.
So what was the moment during research where you said, "Oh wow, this is bigger than I thought"?
Well, it's strange. I kind of just, I guess some people are gifted or have a certain talent, and putting books together for me, it definitely takes work, but it's not really like work. And that's the most important thing in life, is to find something that you enjoy that's not work, that you actually enjoy doing. So that's what I've been doing since the late 90s, just writing for websites, doing books. Like Stan was saying, I primarily write about like music, but I also am very passionate about the Islanders. And the thing too with all the books I've ever done, especially including these 2 books I did with the Islanders, they've always been topics that I really liked and wanted a book to read that wasn't out there on the marketplace. So that's why I did these 2 books, Dynasty and also Hapless Islanders, which the Hapless Islanders book, which the cover looks like this, is about the Islanders' first ever season, 72-73, which they were god awful. But because they were so awful, they actually turned it around very quickly with good draft picks, a very wise hire with their coach. So that was pretty much a story behind those.
What would inspire you to do a book about a terrible team, which I covered?
Right. No, you're right. You're right. Yeah, people looking at that, like for instance, I also did a book a while back about the Mets, and I did the late 70s, early 80s Mets when they were at their worst, the absolute worst. Like you go to Shea Stadium, it would be like 20% full. But now, similar to the Islanders' first season, the Mets in the late 70s, early 80s, they slowly started building their team. And then from those awful teams of the late 70s, early 80s, then you transition into the 1986 Mets World Series winning team. The same with the Islanders with that 72-73 team. They were so awful that they Bill Torrey, to his credit, knew very wisely that they were not going to be able to draft anyone because at that point, there was, of course, the WHA, and they were hogging a lot of the top hockey draft picks. So between that and also at the time, there weren't really rules in effect. Like now, there's when these new NHL teams come in, they get good draft picks and good players from like all different teams. Back then, to quote Jimmy Devellano, they just gave the Islanders "quote unquote" shit. That was his quote for that book. So they had no. I mean, really, just you could say Eddie Westfall was by far their best player that first year. Billy Smith, no one knew what they had with him because the goaltenders were just always under siege each night. So you didn't know if there was really a great goaltender or not within the Islanders organization. Nystrom came up late in the season. Gary Howard came up late in the season. So they were definitely building blocks and parts of that 80 Stanley Cup winning team, but no one really knew. And again, it's just like the reason why I did the book is it was a topic that I just found interesting. And also I just realized too, when I interviewed Billy Harris for the book Dynasty, he was telling me stories about that first season. And he said there could be a book written just about that specific season. And I always stored that in the back of my mind. And then when you got in contact with me, Stan, about 2 years ago, saying how much you like Dynasty, I floated the idea past you, and you said, yes, that's definitely a great idea. You should pursue it. And then that's why I did it.
Tell us about how you picked the title, Hapless. That's a great story right there.
Yes. Good question. When I spoke with Bill Torrey once, he said every single time you would open up or you would take a look at the headlines of a paper, the Islanders were always referred to as hapless the first year, the Hapless Islanders, because they had 2 or 3 multiple losing streaks where they just couldn't win a game at all, and they weren't even competitive. It was just awful to watch. And he said it was that was their term, Hapless Islanders, in every single news article, Hapless Islanders, Hapless Islanders. But I mentioned in the book, to their credit, after that first year, the best of my knowledge, after going back and reading like old articles and things like that, that term Hapless Islanders disappeared very, very quickly. Even with the second season, when they weren't great, but they were definitely better. By the third season, no one called them Hapless Islanders anymore because they had that great run in the playoffs. And then from there on, there was just no reason to call them hapless because they were one of the best hockey teams for the next almost 10 years or so, something like that.
Is it harder to write about champions or a book about a disaster?
It was probably about equal because I had so many great stories for actually both books. The Hapless Islanders book, I was able to, like I was saying, I went back and I found old newspaper articles from 72, 73. So I was able to get some quotes from that, from some of the people that were there covering the games. I also did some brand new interviews for the book. I interviewed you, Stan, again for this book. I interviewed Jimmy Devellano again for this book, who, Stan, you've said before, and I totally agree with you. It's horrible that the Islanders have not given Jimmy Devellano his due. I mean, what he did for that organization, they should really have a banner for him or a Jimmy Devellano night or something like that. In fact, if I could maybe do a little side thing right now, I think that you, Stan, should be in also the Hockey Hall of Fame in Canada. I think that's ridiculous that you're not in there. I have a problem with all kinds of Hall of Fames. I hate the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Hockey Hall of Fame is, I think, admirable, but they have so many things. It should be a lot better. They should definitely have you in there. They should have other people in there too that aren't in there. But that's just my little side thing right there.
I'd rather be on this show with you guys. Okay, let's. I want you to tell the people here, because I don't remember the exact story, but I'll set it up. They're terrible. Season is 3/4 done, and they're playing, of all places, in Boston.
Yep.
The defending champions, Bobby Orr and the Big Bad Bruins, and they win the game 9-7. Now, at the end of the game, I don't know whether you wrote this because I forget. Bill Torrey was going down the stairs. You remember? And the Bruin fan said something.
You know, that I don't recall, but I remember when I spoke with someone, I think it was Billy Harris. He said that the next day the headline was "Break Up the Islanders." Yeah. So was that the story, or was there another story that I'm missing with that?
No, the Torrey, the GM, is the unbelievable thing happened. You beat the Bruins.
Yes.
In Boston.
Oh, now I know. Okay, yeah, I got it now. Go ahead. You can finish
it.
Okay. And then didn't he say something like, "Well, what do you expect?" or something like that? Yeah. That was a great comeback.
Bill is coming down the stairs, and there is a woman there with a friend, and she turns to the friend and said, "I thought you told me that it was going to be a massacre or something tonight." And Torrey leans over and says, "What do you think you saw?"
Yeah, that was really the only bright spot that whole season. But again, something I didn't know by doing research, towards the end of the season, they actually got better. Like, they actually didn't lose as much, and they were more competitive. That also ties in, I think, with Bob Nystrom and also Gary Howard coming in. They also did a coach change about 3/4 of the way through the season, or maybe like a little bit over halfway of the season. So that also helped. And then, of course, when they get Al Arbor in the offseason, they also draft Dennis Potvin. Then it's a major, major stepping stone then for the Islanders at that point.
With this book, Dynasty, I noticed that you interviewed a lot of the first-year players and subsequent players. The book is self-published, so how was it getting those interviews? Did you have any trouble getting these guys to talk to you?
Yeah, some people I did, some people I didn't. By that point, I was kind of established as a writer, but not a sports writer. I had done a few rock books by that point, but I reached out to the Islanders publicist at the time. I forget his name. I don't think he's still with them. And I explained what I was doing, and he was a little bit of help, but to be honest with you, not a great deal of help. And then I just, this was also just as the internet, the internet had started, but nowadays it's very easy to look up people on the internet and go like to the Hockey Players Association and also things like that. But back then it wasn't as easy, like looking up people on the internet. But once I got the ball rolling, like once you speak to people, you're like, hey, could you put me in contact with so-and-so? Like, for instance, Jimmy Devellano was kind enough to put me in contact with Al Arbor and also Claire Arbor, which is Al Arbor's late wife, who is a sweet woman who I really wanted to speak to her for the book. And she was kind enough to also grant me an interview because it was fascinating to hear her side of the story. She was there through everything, and she was telling great stories about what it was like when the Islanders beat the Rangers in 1975, that her and Al went home and they just sat there stunned in silence. They couldn't even speak. They couldn't comprehend what just took place. And there's a great story too that Billy Harris said when they were leaving Madison Square Garden, people were throwing bottles and rocks at the bus. So it shows that sometimes hockey fans are not very well behaved.
Was there anyone in the Islanders organization who surprised you the most during interviews?
Let me think. Chico Resch was a very good interview. Probably the guy who didn't hold back and told the greatest story after story after story was probably Billy Harris, which was their first ever #1 pick. That's also, I hate to sound like a broken record, another gentleman I think that should be on the Islanders like Hall of Fame banner, not in the Hockey Hall of Fame, but the Islanders at their arena have a banner where they salute people that were standout players but were not big enough to have their number actually retired by them or something like that. But Billy Harris, for almost the first decade, was one of their premier players. And yeah, he told great stories, especially about the first year, about him going on road trips and them getting lost, like just everything that could possibly go wrong, and how he thought that possibly the movie Slapshot could have been based on some of their stories at that during that first year. And yeah, they're just like such weird things that would take place. Like they didn't have a practice rink close to Nassau Coliseum, so they had to drive all the way out to Kings Park, which is like with traffic about a good 45 minutes each way. So you think about now how close things are and how convenient things are, but yeah, back then, and I think they even had to take like a school bus back and forth. It wasn't even like a nice coach bus or anything like that. Yeah, just like stories like that. There's also a story about one of the Islanders getting a cut over his eye in practice, and the trainer just taking him into the lobby of the rink and just stitching him up while people are just like walking by, like people who were either waiting to use the rink or people at work there. That's also crazy to think about how things have changed so much over the years.
When you write your oral histories, how do you decide what stories make the cut?
Yeah, it's a good question. The thing too that when I'm speaking to people, sometimes I'll get the same story told a bunch of times. Then I have to either decide, all right, who told it the best, or all right, maybe I could take this person's start, this person's middle, this person's finish. So it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle that you're kind of always fitting together. Yeah, and then also when I start these books too, I'll have a set list of questions that I'm going. This was especially true with the first Islanders book, the book called I'll tell you the exact story. Then Dynasty: The Oral History of the New York Islanders, 1972 to 1984. That's the full title. Yeah, when I started that book, I had a list of all questions that I was just running down. But then as I'm going on, you realize that you're getting a lot of info with certain topics and not as many other topics. So then you kind of have to even it out. Like, I'm not going to ask someone who joined the Islanders in the early 80s about like the first few years, because that's just totally pointless. And that would be just a total like waste of time. So you kind of have to make little tiny adjustments as you go along with the questions and exactly who you're speaking to too.
What do you think defines the Islanders dynasty more? Talent, coaching, culture, or something more intangible?
Everything. Also, it was the location too. It was a very improbable location. To this day, you go on New York Post, it's all Rangers, all Rangers, all Rangers. Nothing about the Islanders. I have a theory living here on Long Island for the past, I don't know, probably since 1994, since when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. If you go out and you look at people wearing a hockey shirt, you look at if someone has a hockey bumper sticker, anything like that, or if someone's hanging a hockey flag outside their house, I'd say 9 times out of 10, or a little bit less, very little less, it's always going to be the Rangers and not the Islanders. When I was young, I was going to elementary school, and the Islanders were in the middle of winning all the Stanley Cups. You could not find a single Ranger fan anywhere here on Long Island. In my school, you go out to the mall, there was no Rangers anything. So my theory, I would love to see at least one more time in my lifetime the Islanders win one more Stanley Cup, because my theory in my head is if the Islanders won another Stanley Cup, then suddenly you would see all the Islanders jerseys, shirts, hats, everything being worn and also displayed. And who knows, maybe it'll also help the sales of my books too.
I want to go back just a bit, and I want to say, in terms of the Hapless book, I have what I consider the most underrated, likable personality, and that was Claire Arbor, Al's wife. She had a knack for telling in a different way about the situation. I know that she was not one who wanted to talk about the team, whatever. That you got her was terrific, and that what she said and when she said it was terrific. How did you feel about her? Where'd you do it?
Yeah. No, that was actually the first book, which is the Islanders Dynasty book was the one that I
Dynasty, I'm
interviewed her
sorry.
for. Yeah.
Yeah.
How I got her, let me think. Well, it was okay. When I first went through Jimmy Devellano, I asked him, "Are you still in contact with Al?" He said, "Yes, but I have to tell you, he's not doing very well health-wise. I don't know if he'll do it, but here's his phone number you can call." So I call him. He answered the phone. He was living in Florida at the time. I explained to him who I was, what I was doing, and he couldn't have been kinder. He's like, "Yeah, absolutely. Just right now I'm busy. If you can call back." And he told me a day or time to call back, which I did. And when I was done interviewing him, I remember I hung up the phone and I was like, "Oh, wait a second. I should have asked him if I could interview also Claire," because now that I think about it, when I first called, Claire answered the phone. That's what it was. Claire answered the phone. I explained what I was doing. She handed the phone to Al. That's what happened. So when I was done with the interview with Al, I was like, "Oh, I forgot to ask Claire. I have to ask Claire because that would be great to interview Claire for this book, because I don't think she was ever really interviewed at length for anything Islanders related." And she, she went to all the games and everything like that. It was also interesting to hear like how her family, her children, how they, I'm pretty sure that she talks about how they had to deal with like Ranger fans at school and things like that. Like that was also interesting to hear. But really, the interesting, like I was saying before, a very interesting thing was how they were just in shock and speechless after that when the Islanders beat the Rangers. And there was also a similar story. I forget the exact wording, but she was actually at that game. She was at that. It would have been game 3 of the first round, because back then it was just a 3-game series, and whoever won the first 2 games won back in 1975. And she was there, and someone behind them knew that she was with the team. I don't know if they knew that she was Al Arbor's wife, but when the Islanders were winning for most of the game, and the Rangers came back in the third period and tied it. And I remember, Stan, I'll just quickly, you told a very good story that you were watching it on TV in Manhattan, and it was so tense you couldn't take it that you went for a walk with your dog around the block. Right. And so then they're going into OT, and the people behind Claire tap her on the shoulder and they're like, "Oh, you know what? Congratulations. It was a great season that you guys had." And then within 12 seconds, JP Parisi scores it and they win. And she turns around and she goes something like, "See you next year," or like, "What do you expect?" or like something like that. A little like dig, which she absolutely, which was perfectly timed. So yeah, so just like stories like that were very interesting to hear from Claire, which sadly I believe she passed away a few years back, which was sad to hear.
Yeah. One other thing, what Claire meant to our, you have to remember that they both grew up together in Sudbury, Ontario. And she was Al's childhood sweetheart. I think they got married before, while they were still teens, and she was his whole life. But she was able to put the brakes on him when he'd get, crazy like coaches would. I don't know whether you remember whether she talked about that, but that was one of her greatest virtues as a hockey wife, helping Al get where he was, and when he was up there, how to make him at his best and not to go nuts like I
Right.
would.
Well, I remember one thing she said, which was interesting, which I had no idea about. She also gave background as to how Al became the Islanders coach. And people tend to forget he was the coach of, I believe, the St. Louis Blues. Wasn't he the coach? Yeah. And there was some kind of shakeup with the owner, or there was something going on behind the scenes that wasn't kosher, and they didn't really show Al a lot of respect, and they wound up firing him. A lot of people don't remember, before he came to the Islanders, he finished the 72-73 season, I believe, as a scout for the then Atlanta Flames.
Correct.
And there was, so then that's how the Islanders, got him. And Bill Torrey and him, I forget how they go back. It may have been back to somehow the California Seals or something. They crossed paths or maybe were they called the Oakland Seals back then, Stan? Were they, yeah. And they somehow crossed paths and they stayed in contact, and Bill knew that Al was going to be the guy. So, and then, something else I learned too is I forget the gentleman's name. You probably know this, Stan. One of the people the Islanders tried to get as their first coach was the Boston Bruins coach who won the Stanley Cup in 1970 or 71, but then left. I forget his name. Okay, yeah.
Sinden.
There you go. Yeah, the Islanders, they reached out to him to be their first coach, and he said no. And then they wound up getting their first ever coach.
Yeah, that's one thing about your book that like the things you forget, like because I had always assumed that Al Arbor was the first coach, like he was there from day one,
No.
but he wasn't. There was two other guys before him, and
Yep.
yeah, and another thing was I lost my train of thought now, but I'd like to tell you about my connection to the New York Islanders. Was I played 2 years of senior hockey up in Whitehorse in the Yukon, and the other goalie was named Dennis Salamandic, and Dennis had played for the Medicine Hat Tigers, and the other goalie on that team was Kelly Rudy.
Oh, okay.
So I heard a lot of stories about Kelly Rudy while I was playing up in Whitehorse. So that's the connection to the New York Islanders. And I was wondering, did you get a chance to interview Mike Bossy?
I reached out to Mike, and we just couldn't make it happen. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not gonna. Yeah, there's like a whole thing behind that. I'd rather just let's just say that it didn't happen. We're just gonna leave it at that.
Mike was a challenge.
Oh.
Mike was not like the other guys on the team, and this is not criticism because you have 20 plus guys on the team. I'll transfer that to this, and I have about a dozen journalists who would second the motion that the Islanders as a group were the greatest bunch of guys you'll ever meet. They were humble right through the 4 Stanley Cup wins and 19 straight, let's not forget that, 19 straight series, playoff series victories, which will never be, nobody will ever come close to that. Nobody ever did come close to 19 when you think about it. But Mike was the one guy who I would say was a different personality, and but when Mike was in the right mood, he was a great guy. But I would understand what Greg meant by that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a shame because growing up, he was my favorite player on the Islanders. But I just couldn't make it happen. I tried everything I could and just couldn't get it done.
Greg, when you're writing, what's harder, chasing players down for interviews or fast checking old stories that contradict each other?
I mean, a little bit of everything. There's not really anything that's the biggest challenge. I mean, really, the only thing that kind of creates a little bit of stress is like, am I going to get this guy? Am I going to get this person? Like, actually getting the interview sometimes. And I also learned something over the years that when someone says they'll do an interview, do it as soon as possible because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Like there's been sadly books where I interview someone, or even not for books, for websites and things, and sadly the gentleman passes away not that long later, or they'll change their mind, or whatever takes place. So if anyone says yes, I'll do it, I always try to do it as soon as possible. Yeah, I don't put it off. So that's my one tidbit for any writers out there.
What's the strangest thing you've done for research?
Strangest thing. Let me think about this. I can't really think of anything strange. I mean, it was cool when I was doing the whole entire Dynasty book. I got to go to a Islanders practice at the Coliseum, which was good, and it was kind of cool just to walk through the Coliseum while, like, when there was nothing going on, and just seeing, like, because I used to go to the Coliseum. What's funny is I never saw an Islanders game at the Coliseum during the Dynasty years. I only saw it many, many years later, but I saw rock concerts there and like all other stuff throughout the years. And so that was kind of a cool thing to do, was just to get the opportunity to go to the Coliseum and look around. And then also, I mean, the thing too that we didn't touch on is till the day I die, the Islanders really fumbled the ball at the Coliseum. They should have just leveled it, built a brand new arena, because they had the infrastructure there and everything. I've been to UBS Arena once, and it's nice, but it's not as great. And there's a lot of glaring things, like there's no Islanders Hall of Fame, or like there's not an Islanders museum there. At least when you go to Citi Field, the Mets have like a nice Mets museum and everything like that. And the Islanders are loaded with history and things. You could really do a lot there. I mean, it's great, Stan, that they have a tribute to you with, like, the books and your the recreation of your study and everything like that. That's like awesome, but they should really take it a step further, I think. And really they should be much more proud of their whole heritage and also history.
For me, the toughest question of this interview is this challenge. 4 Cup teams, which was the best?
Well, I have to go with the Islanders because
Which
the reason you
of
just
the
said, because
4 Islander Cup teams would you say was the
oh,
best?
I got you. I thought you were
Best
asking
of
me
the
like the
4.
Canadians, the Islanders, the Oilers. Yeah. The 4 Cup teams were the best. I mean, the second one, they were just like a steamroller. No one got in their way. There was no challenge. So I probably the second one, but which was funny is that's the only Stanley Cup run that I did not watch any games of. Like I've gone back and watched them on YouTube and everything like that. So probably the second one was the one that would, no one even came close to beating them. They swept the Rangers. They beat the North Stars 4-1. I believe they also swept the Toronto Maple Leafs, which was great revenge for that whole 1978 debacle. So, and they even took care of the Oilers, and the Oilers were at that point were definitely, it was clear that they were going to be the next premier team. So yeah, I'd have to go with that second Cup winning team is probably their best, which funny is the one that I watched the least amount of. What do you think, Stan?
Well, it's funny. I wouldn't say that team that you picked, the second one, because the final was just too easy. Beating the Rangers was never easy, and for me, it's got to be kicking the ass of the Edmonton Oilers in 4 straight, and I can't tell you how happy I still am over that. 4 straight,
Right.
4 straight.
Yep.
And the way they finished it, they had a 3-zip lead. No, I have to tell you what happened before. The day before, and they're now up 3-0, right? And the league had a luncheon at the hotel across from the Coliseum. It was an all-league luncheon there, and they had both teams there. And I remember Glenn Sather, who was the coach GM of the Oilers, he got up and made a speech, and it was scary. He made it seem like, well, we're going to win the next 4 games, and we're wasting our time. So just sticking it to this guy was, and to win it down, they're winning 3-0, and then all of a sudden Messier gets a goal in the second period and another goal at the end of the second period. They're only leading by 1 going into the third, and then the great and underrated still Kenny Morrow putting it in the open net.
Yep.
I can't tell you how happy I still am.
Yeah. Well, you could also make the argument that first Stanley Cup team they beat a very heavily favored Flyers team who didn't they set the record that season for most consecutive wins or something like that, and everyone thought that was just a foregone conclusion that the Flyers were just going to take care of the Islanders, but the Islanders shocked everyone and they wound up winning that. And should we talk about the whole 2-3-2 controversy about the 1984 Stanley Cup Finals now, or should we wait?
No, we don't wait. That was they got a raw deal.
They did.
You tell us.
Okay, I will. But honestly, I'll tell you what. The bottom line is, you actually brought up a great point during one of our interviews, I believe for the Dynasty book. I don't think this is what you said, but this is what I'm saying. I don't think it was so much the 2-3-2 setup that did them in. It's what you said. One word: attrition. At that point, like, how old are they? How many consecutive series have they won? You got to keep in mind, if a team that stinks doesn't even make the playoffs, they have far longer summer off than a team that goes not only deeper in the playoffs, but actually wins the Stanley Cup. So that's like almost like an extra month, of playing and grinding it out. And you're also playing the best of the best teams. It's no longer teams that are easy to just kind of brush out of the way. So really, I don't think it was. I mean, it was a shitty thing they did, but then again, there are teams, like, to switch sports. Look at the Mets in 1986. They lost the first 2 games at home. The 1986 World Series, they decided for some reason to make it 2-3-2. Also, the Mets lose the first 2 at home. They win the next 2 in Boston. And then they drop the 5th. They come back to New York and then also win the next 2. So if it was one of the earlier Islanders teams, I think they would have found a way to win. I think it was more Dennis Potvin was very badly injured. He was also, when I interviewed John Potvin, people sometimes tend to overlook. He had a lot of mental weight. His father had just recently passed away, and he was very close with his father. That was really weighing on him. I believe Brian Trottier or one of the main guys was also injured very badly. One of the guys didn't even play at all. I think it was either Langevin or Gord Lane didn't even play at all. I think that last 1984 Stanley Cup. And it's just sad too, because I mean, Billy Smith, one of the best goaltending displays I ever saw was in that 1983 Stanley Cup. But in 1984, he was just like under siege and he just didn't have it. You know, he was and then something else someone brought up, which I didn't know, and this is also interesting by doing these interviews. Someone brought up that I think in the 1983 final, they had either Butch Goring or they had two Islanders always on Gretzky or close to Gretzky. And then for some reason with that last Stanley Cup, they didn't do that. And that's when Gretzky just went wild and then just everything just fell apart. So there's, so many different factors. But really, I'll tell you, Stan, I think, have the best theory, which is really just attrition was what took place.
A lot of the players you interviewed said what a great motivator Al Arbour was. And one of the great stories that I heard was that there was a game going on and late in the first period and Al Arbour leans over to Clark Gillies while he's on the bench and he says something like, "Did you have a good weekend?" Something like that. And Gillies looks at him kind of funny and he says, "Because I was just wondering if you felt like playing today." Like what a great line to say to somebody in the middle of a game to get them to going, because they and if I remember correctly, Gillies had a great game after that point.
There's also a great story too that he wasn't happy with how Dennis Potvin was playing, so he had someone wheel out a barrel full of cement, to just show him that he is playing like he has cement on his back. He did that as a interest. He also did a thing too. There's an interesting story I learned in the first book, Dynasty, that there was an Islanders player, I forget who it was, but Al was trying to make a point. He had all the like back in the 70s, all the hockey players had to get dressed up in like sports jackets coming out of the plane to the Coliseum and things like that. So they went straight to the Coliseum from the plane. And I guess they weren't playing very well at the time. So he gave all the players eggs to put in the breast pocket of their jacket. And his thing was you're playing like no one's even bumping into you. So you could have these eggs in your jacket. They're not even going to get broken. And then one of the Islanders players, I forget who, took an egg and supposedly broke it over Al Arbour's head, which is such a sign of complete disrespect. And shortly thereafter, that player was gone. So that just shows like that you don't mess with Al Arbour, which to his credit, he was that just shows the type of person he was. And that's really what sets apart such a great legendary coach like Al Arbour and some of the coaches nowadays, not so much in hockey, but in like football and stuff where there's no respect for the coaches and people are screaming at their coaches and acting like big babies and stuff. It was a totally different time back then.
Greg, in your opinion, which current NHL team is the closest to building a dynasty, or is the dynasty era dead?
Well, I mean, probably the most obvious answer to that is obviously the Florida Panthers, because they're already 2 in a row. I mean, they're not doing quite as good this season, but I'm sure they're going to turn it on, sooner or later. I am very hopeful now. I'm so glad I can finally say this out loud with a straight face. I really do think there are great things around the corner now for the New York Islanders. And I'm so happy to finally be able to say that out loud. I felt that when Trotz came aboard, and then we just kind of got away from it for the last few seasons of just kind of mediocre play and questionable, like non-trades and not, holding on to players too long and signing guys to ridiculous, I think, far too long contracts. But now I think they have a great they have a great coach in place, great GM. Schaefer is, of course, fantastic. I mean, it shows how great he is that he's now making all the other guys around him play so much better. I mean, that just shows, that to me is a total reflection of when you had Dennis Potvin come aboard and people like that it just improves the whole entire team around you. You see how much better now Barzal is playing. It just, and then of course now we have the goalie back to playing fantastic again, Sorokin. So, and they, smartly, it wasn't working out with whoever his coach was. So they got rid of his coach and they brought back a coach that he had success with in the past. And lo and behold, now he's back to playing absolutely fantastic. So I think the Islanders are finally on the right path. So maybe not this year. I'm not expecting them. I'd just be happy if they even make it to the playoffs this year. But in the next 1 or 2 or 3 seasons, I expect them to be a perennial cup contender, say from next year going forward.
As a journalist, I look at this Schaefer kid. I can't believe it. Now you got to remember that before he came to training camp, there was a question of, he's too young. He can't make the team.
Mm-hmm.
But he kept saying, I want to make, he dedicated. And the kid is so level and so nice and so funny. He's like, you couldn't make this guy up.
Right.
There's nothing, if you had 10 holes to fill, put 1, 2, 3 up to 10, everything is right.
Yep.
Everything is right. And of course he rebounded from a double tragedy. The woman who he was boarding with had committed suicide, and then not long after that, his mother died of cancer. And for a kid to weather that storm and then to come to where he is now, I tell you something, unreal, really unreal.
The thing is, I'm just trying not to get my hopes up too high because, he's fantastic so far. I just keep my fingers crossed that there's not a bad injury or something lurking around the corner, but you really can't prevent that. What's going to happen is going to happen. But it would be great if we can look back and say, like, Schaefer was the Islanders' Derek Jeter or Tom Brady, like that one guy that totally turns the team around and creates a whole, dynasty, or just great team after great team that contends every single year. So I have my fingers crossed with that, but he's off to a fantastic start. In fact, Stan, I would ask you, who are some Islander players from the past that would you say were off to such a good start as Schaefer so far?
Well, Brian Trottier was as amazing as a forward. And because he looked like a baby. He looked like he just got bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with Bossy.
Mm-hmm.
Each one a different year, and to a certain extent, Clark Gillies. But I just want to remind or mention, we forgot one guy, and going back to 1984, when they're playing the Oilers, everybody was injured, but nobody was more injured than Bob Bourne. Now, Bob Bourne was one of the greatest skaters. He's the only guy I ever saw in a playoff game who went end to end through the entire Ranger team and scored.
I remember that.
But Bob Bourne, and he was a fighter. He was like the perfect second line guy, all around. And he had a terrible injury. And I remember I was very friendly with him, and he was so pissed off because Al wouldn't put him in. And Al didn't put him in because he knew how dangerous it would be. And he symbolized the total injury list on the team, and he never did get to play. And you have to credit Al for saving this guy's hockey career, because it was a very, very bad injury.
Yeah. The thing too with those Islanders teams, which is totally that is totally unheard of nowadays, is they didn't do a lot of commercials. They didn't do a lot of promotion commercial type things. Whereas now, if you're a Stanley Cup champion or like any kind of champion, there's endorsement deals and commercials on TV and everything like that. And the Islanders, those early 80s Islanders, totally did not want to do that. They just wanted to fly under the radar and just keep on winning.
One of my favorite stories in Dynasty was the lead up to drafting Mike Bossy. And that was the year Dale McCourt went first and Barry Beck went second.
Yep.
And can you tell us about what the decision making in drafting Bossy?
Yeah, there was a player, I forget. I don't know if it was one of the names you just mentioned, but his nickname was Red. there was a player whose nickname was Red, and he was the one that everyone thought was going to be the big player, and he wound up turning into nothing. And he went before Bossy. And Mike Bossy didn't go till if I believe it was in the teens, right? If I'm not mistaken, in the draft, he was not even close
Yeah,
to
it
being the
was.
first.
The Rangers had 2
Right.
picks
Yep.
ahead of them.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I still see, like, if I watch, if I go on like YouTube and watch like hockey highlights, I still see to this day Ranger fans like, I still can't believe we did. We took 2 guys before Bossy and things like that. Yeah, I believe it was
Duguay was
Duguay
1.
and all. Yeah, okay, exactly. Yep, Duguay. Yeah, which I will say though, to the Rangers' credit, the first few years look like they may have made the right decision, because in 1979 they actually made it to the Stanley Cup, and I believe Duguay played a pretty big role in that, or he was at least a contributor to that. But
Yeah.
then everything turned out the way it should, and we found out that Mike Bossy was probably one of, if not the greatest goal scorer. Or I mean, like, if you think about when he got injured, and if he didn't get injured, if he played so many more years, I'm sure he would have, again, the thing too, which really gets my goat, is when there's these specials on ESPN with all these greatest dynasties and all this stuff. It's always about the New England Patriots. It's about the Edmonton Oilers, but you never ever hear anything about the Islanders, which is such a crime. I mean, again, to go back to what I was saying before, I think the Rangers winning in 1994 gets more coverage and it's referred to more than the Islanders winning 19 consecutive playoff series and also 4 consecutive Stanley Cups. I think it's completely outrageous, if you ask me.
It's the curse of Uniondale. When you're Uniondale and you're up against the 5 boroughs of New York and the history of the Garden, it was tough. It was tough, and they handled it like gentlemen. There were never any moaning and this and that and whatever. So it's all part of life, and they did very well with what they had.
Yep, exactly. Yep. To their credit, everything they did, just pretty much everything they touched turned to gold. I mean, it took a few seasons, and there were some growing pains. When I interviewed Brian Trottier for the Dynasty book, I told him, I'm like, oh, there was a period in the late 70s where people were saying, oh, the Islanders chokers. They keep losing these big playoff series to the Maple Leafs, to the hated Rangers. And his answer was very simple. He just says, no, it just was not our time at that point. They had to learn how to win. They had to learn what to do, what not to do. And it's just kind of a growing stage. I mean, some teams can just come out of nowhere and shock you and go right to the top. Other teams have to take a different route. The Islanders took that different route.
I think Maeve mentioned in the past that Islanders were criticized for playing a boring game.
Yeah, well, I mean, up to a certain point, but I mean, when you have someone like Bossy and also Trottier playing on the same line, that's a pretty dynamic line right there. And you also had Billy Smith whacking people with his stick and fighting people and things like that. You also had Clark Gillies, who was like the toughest fighter, but he could also score. He wasn't a goon. I mean, when he takes care of the much feared Dave Schultz in the 1975 playoffs, and to the best of my knowledge, Schultz was never as feared after that.
Right.
That right there just shows that, the Islanders, I never really thought of them as kind of a boring team.
No, that was applesauce.
Yeah.
Applesauce. Never. The Devils, yes.
Mm-hmm.
When the Devils won the first cup, right after the Rangers Cup, when the Devils won the cup in 1995, that was the alibi that the Canadian media had, because they were so sure Detroit was going to win. One of the idiot writers in Toronto said that the Red Wings are going to win the series in 3 games. So it was the Devils. But you said the word. You said the word, Greg. Hated Rangers. How much did you hate the Rangers? And when was the most you hated them?
Well, I mean, let me think. I mean, I will say this. There is definitely a hatred between the Islanders and the Rangers. But at this stage of my life, like, I have friends that are Rangers fans, and it's actually fun to sometimes watch Islanders and also Rangers games together. Just that we are kind of giving each other crap, kind of back and forth. But part of me, just as a fan of the Islanders, I have to admit that I was secretly rooting against them in the 1994 Stanley Cup because it was kind of funny at the time when the whole 1940 chant, and all that stuff. That was a pretty funny thing. I mean, now as I'm older looking back, I really do actually feel bad for a lot of the early 80s Rangers teams are actually very, very good teams. The ones that were coached by Herb Brooks. If they didn't have the Islanders in their way, I think they would have made it to a Stanley Cup and possibly even won a Stanley Cup. Maybe even like in 1982, because in 1982, the Oilers were shockingly knocked off. So it would have been the Rangers against the Canucks, and the Islanders had no problem handling the Canucks. So who knows if the Rangers found a way to get through the Islanders in 82, maybe that could have been their year. Who knows? And that would have been, oh man, to think the Rangers knocked the Islanders dynasty or was the next team in line or the team in the middle of an Islanders dynasty would have been pretty hard to swallow.
The first hockey writer of all time, Greg, in case you didn't know it, was William Shakespeare. And what he would say to you right now about all this and that and the other thing, there's much virtue in if. So you can if until the cows come home. You can win the iffy league, but the Islanders won the big one.
Right. I agree. I do agree. I mean, it seems like now, because Stan, I also enjoy following you on X or Twitter, whatever it's called now. And something that I also give you credit for is you definitely speak your mind. And something that you're very vocal about is how the Rangers are greatly underachieving in the last few seasons. And it's similar to what you just said, a lot of what ifs and a lot of losing big games. And you could also say the Toronto Maple Leafs are also a team that for the past few seasons, I don't know how they didn't win last year when you're that close to eliminating. Weren't they playing the Panthers, if I'm not mistaken, last?
There's an Islander connection, my friend, and it's the Tavares connection.
Right.
He double-crossed us.
Yeah. Well,
he double-crossed us, and we'll
Islanders
never forget that, and they'll never win a cup because of that. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm disappointed in you, Greg.
I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Don't think. I'm going to tell you. You don't hate the Rangers enough.
I know. I knew you were going to say that. But see, all right, but now this is how I look at it now. Okay, now hold on a second. Let me just state my case. Now more so than ever, people are getting traded and everything like that. Who's to say that like a Rangers superstar is not going to be on the Islanders very soon? I mean, that, like that type of stuff with free agency and everything like that. I don't know. And honestly, I don't have much of a leg to stand on because the Islanders have not won a Stanley Cup in 40 years or over 40 years, whereas the Rangers, it's also pretty long since the Rangers have won too. But if we have to give credit where credit's due, the Rangers were the last true New York team to win a Stanley Cup. So until the Islanders win again, I really don't have much of a leg to stand on with that. But let me just quickly say one more thing too. Now with Tavares, I do agree that was a shady maneuver, but it was more a stupid move of the Islanders on that part. You don't do a handshake agreement on something like that. Are you insane? You would trade him, get as much as you can for him, and on the way out, you say, "Look, we're going to do everything in our power to get you back next year, but we can't turn this down. There's no way we can." But that is the sign of a schlemiel. Right?
Not only that, but now you qualify as the young maven.
Well, Stan, that is one of the high points so far in my whole entire writing career. Thank you so much for that. I definitely appreciate that.
You deserve it.
Thank you.
Another story that I had completely forgotten about was the 1975 playoffs where the Rangers fell 3-0 to Pittsburgh and then came back to win 4 in a row. But Islanders, yeah, sorry. The Islanders fell down to Pittsburgh 3-0, came back to win 4 in a row to win this series. But what I really forgot about was they almost did it again the next series with Philadelphia.
Indeed. Yeah, actually, Al Arbour, and this is also a second example or a third example of Al Arbour really motivating his team. After they're down 3-0 against the Penguins in 75, he holds a meeting. They have a practice. And the Islanders are very sluggish. They're not really trying very hard. And Al blows his whistle, says, "Everyone, come in. He holds the meeting. He's like, "Look, if there's one single player here who doesn't think we have a chance of coming back and winning this series, I want you off the ice right now." And that definitely got everyone's attention. And he said, look, just listen to me. This game that's coming up, game 4, we pretty much match up to this team even. Do you think you can can you beat your player one shift? They said, yeah, I could do that. I said, all right, good. Can you beat him a second shift? Yeah, I think we can do that. He said, look, just take it shift by shift, and we will definitely turn this around. And lo and behold, they won 4 straight. The first team to do so since the 1942 Maple Leafs, right, Stan?
That's correct.
Right. So, and it's since then it's been done like a few other times, but and then like you just said, is that they were down 3-0 against the Flyers, and the Flyers were a much feared team at this point. They were, of course, the Broad Street Bullies, but the Islanders, to their credit, turned it around. There's a thing that people tend to get overlooked. That wasn't there some kind of superstitious thing that there was a bar that the Flyers players would often go to and it burned down to the ground or something like that, and they thought that may have been a jinx for the Flyers or something. But then what they did for Game 7 is they had Kate Smith come out and actually sing the national anthem. And they would usually play a pre-recorded thing of her singing the national anthem. And the Flyers would always win when they would play that. But they actually had Kate Smith come out. And Eddie Westfall tried to make it even. He came out and handed her flowers, but it wasn't good enough. When I interviewed Chico Resch for the book Dynasty, he said he had a new goalie stick, and the shot that was the first goal chipped a bit of the stick. So he just said, if I just had my old trusty stick, who knows? It could have been a different outcome. But again, Stan, what you said, what if till the cows come home, right? So
I have one last question before we wrap up.
Sure.
So I'm a Leafs fan.
Okay.
Are the Leafs actually hapless right now or just dramatic?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but one thing I will say, I don't believe in teams being cursed or jinxed. I think the Boston Red Sox proved that in the early 2000s. You could totally come out of nowhere. The Chicago Cubs, too. Teams can turn, of course, the Rangers in 1994. Any team at any point, I think, can turn around. There's certain teams, though, if we're going to just to skip sports, like they're just run horribly. I think when you're a horribly run team, like you look at the New York Jets, the Cleveland Browns, those are just bad run teams from the top on down, just from the owner to the general manager, just to, the coach. It's just a complete horror show. That's what makes me enjoy the Islanders so much now, is that they have everything in place from the owner down to the GM, to the coach, the players. So with the Maple Leafs, it's true what Stan said, what if we could say, but the bottom line is winners win. Winners find a way to win. Losers lose. That's really it. I wouldn't be shocked if the Leafs win at some point, but until they get over that hurdle, they're just, I guess they do deserve the choker term, because they have choked the last few seasons especially with the amount of talented players they have. It just makes no sense. So I don't know. I'm kind of baffled with that, but I won't give up hope, though. That much I'll say.
I'm going to take the choke and turn choke into a joke, because Elena wants me to finish the shows with a joke, okay? So this is in Miami Beach, and these 2 upper middle-aged women are in a car, and Sheila is driving behind. She's behind the wheel, and Sophie is in the passenger seat. And Sophie notices that Sheila has gone through 3 red lights. And finally she says to her, Sheila, do you know that you've gone through 3 red lights? And Sheila says, you mean I'm driving?
So my last comment would be 1982 Islanders Canucks final. I'm a Canucks fan.
Okay.
And I keep coming back to Mike Bossy, but he was the MVP of the Stanley Cup year. And, he scored what I consider to be the greatest goal in Stanley Cup finals history. He was coming to the front of the net, had possession of the puck, and his feet get yanked out from under him. So he's actually perpendicular to the ice, 2 feet in the air, and he gets off. I think it's a backhand, and he picks the top corner. Like who does that? That.
I want to finish the show by telling Teapot, because he told that story, he's now sharing the Young Maven Award with you, Greg. That is a great, great story, my friend.
But now, Stan, Stan, I want to ask you too. How would you compare Mike Bossy to some of the other great goal scorers in whole entire
There's
hockey
only
history?
one person to compare him with, and that's Rocket Richard, because Rocket to me was the greatest goal scorer of his kind, and Mike Bossy in his era, Rocket during a 6-team league, Bossy in his era, greatest of his kind. And now Alex Ovechkin, the greatest of his kind. But you interrupted me. You have to shake hands with this guy from afar because you are both the young mavens.
How about we're going to do a virtual fist pump. How about that? There you go. We did. Now, just before we go, I just want to show that I am such a Stan Fischler fan. Look what I paid top dollar for recently on eBay.
Wow.
A Stan Fischler classic.
Wow.
The Triumphant Islanders, hockey's new dynasty. So now, I got to give you credit now, Stan. You are a Nostradamus as well. That is also a title that you have to add, because how did you know they were a dynasty back in, this came out in 1976, I believe. How did you know they were going to become a dynasty?
It was beginner's luck.
I'm just going to show you. I just have one more thing I also wanted to show you, which is sad in a way, but in the during the 1984 run, they were advertising this during Islanders games. It was a New York Islanders pennant. Can you see that? It's the Islanders logo. And what's kind of sad about it is you could have paid a premiere for the premiere version of this. It was 4 little, probably fake diamonds, and they said, and when the Islanders win their 5th Stanley Cup, we will put in a 5th little diamond. And here it is in 2025, and we're still waiting for the 5th cup, which now brings up a good point that if they do win the 5th Stanley Cup, can I bring this back and get a 5th? Does that deal still hold true, or
yes,
I wonder?
Because my last punchline: the pennant is mightier than the sword.
Right.
I'll show you my pride and joy here. This is me in a picture.
Oh wow, very nice.
Me and Sen. Can you tell who that player is in the middle? Former NHLer.
Who is it?
Oh, tell me.
That's Dave Taylor.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Greg, for joining us today. Maeve, T-Bag, always a pleasure. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and listen to Bottle Rocket anywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you next week.